Hello and welcome to my presentation on cells, and let me go through the objectives for this presentation are as follows. We are going to define the cell as a basic unit and structure as a basic unit of structure and function of living organisms. We're also going to look at some labeled diagrams of generalized plant cells and animal cells as seen under the electron microscope. We're going to relate the cell structures, that is organelles. So the cell structures we're talking about are the organelles, to their specific functions, and finally we're going to compare the structure of a typical plant and animal cell as seen with an electron microscope. So first, the cell. All living things are composed of cells. Alright, the basic unit, the smallest living unit in any organism is the cell. Right, they are tiny structures in which the life function of the organism is carried out. A cell is made up of basically a cytoplasm. Some books or even online will tell you protoplasm as well, and the cell membrane and the nucleus. So there are three major components of all cells. They have a cytoplasm, they have a cell membrane, and they have a nucleus. Alright. Now cells were discovered by this scientist by the name of Robert Hooke. Right, he's an English scientist and he did this discovery in 1665. There's a whole story behind how he came to the understanding that living tissues are made of cells. We don't have to go into that today. We're just looking at cells in a general sense. Right, so cells are extremely small, and since they are so small, they are expressed in the unit of measurement is expressed in micrometers, which is basically 1,000th of a millimeter. So if you have a ruler and you look on your ruler and you see 1 millimeter, then 1 micrometer would be 1,000 times smaller than that. So that gives you an understanding now of how small we're talking about when we talk about the size of cells. To see objects this small, we need a microscope. We can't depend on our naked eyes to see objects this small, so we need a microscope. Now we have two types of microscope for this presentation here. We're talking about two types. You have a light microscope, and we have what we call an electron microscope. Now the light microscope will allow you to see basically the cell cytoplasm, the vacuole, the nucleus, and the cell membrane. You'll be able, and the cell wall. You'll be able to see those structures when you use a light microscope. However, to see other tiny structures within the cell, we have to use an electron microscope. So an electron microscope now gives us the ability to observe tiny structures within the already tiny cell. Right, so you can understand and appreciate that an electron microscope is extremely powerful. And if you notice how the setup is compared to that of the light microscope, it has a whole lot of components attached to it, even a computer and so on and so forth. So when we move on and look at microscopy, where we look as a study now where we go in depth and look at how the microscopes work in terms of resolution and all the other aspects of microscopy, then you will get a better understanding. But for now, we have two types of microscope, light and electron. So moving on now to the generalized structure of plants and animal cells, right? So we have an animal cell here and a plant cell over here. Now these diagrams are simplified, So they are not really giving you exactly what it is, um, that the cell would look like if we're looking at it using an electron microscope. These are pictures of the cell, right? But from these pictures, I would want you to appreciate a few things in terms of the fact that we have a more fixed shape. We have cell wall and cell membrane and the organelles, the nucleus, vacuole, and so forth. Right? So if we want to compare them now, we look at the individual structures in them, and that comparison, we could put it in a table like this one. So for example, for the plant cell, it contains a cell wall with cellulose, right? And also a the animal cell, on the other hand, there's no cell wall, no cellulose. We have some plant cell contain, probably most of the plant cells contain chloroplast with chlorophyll. When it comes to animal cell, there's no chloroplast, no chlorophyll. Plant cells, because plants make their own food, it's stored as starch, so we'll find starch granules often found in the plant cell. In the animal cells, we don't find starch granules, but we will find glycogen granules, and this is, the storage of glucose and so forth in the cell. Good. We have large permanent vacuole within the plant cell, and this actually so large that it forces the cytoplasm up against the cell wall. So if we go back to our picture up here, you can see this very large vacuole, this big white space in the middle. That's a large central vacuole. If you look in the animal cell, you see one here, but it is very small compared to that of the animal cell. So the vacuole, if present, is small, right? And this is because the cytoplasm fills the entire structure of the animal cell. So you really have very small space for the vacuole. Well, these two other features are, they vary, but generally the plant cell is have a more fixed shape. I guess that's the word, a regular shape or fixed shape. And the fixed shape is due to the presence of the cell wall. So I can just add that in there, slash fixed shape. Right, so regular slash fixed shape, and this is due to the presence of the cell wall. Right, but when we go to the animal cell now, it has an irregular shape, and why we say irregular is that the it varies, and the fact that there is no cell wall means that it doesn't really have anything to restrain it in a fixed position. Generally, the animal cells are smaller than the plant cells. Right, so generally larger for plant cells and generally smaller for animal cells. All right. So when we look at the structures now, so we talk about the cell membrane. Cell membrane is a living structure, and it acts as a regulator, right? By selectively allowing the passage of certain substances, for example, food material, waste material, and other substances into the cells, right? So because it is basically permeable, the word permeable here means the ability porous for things to pass through it. And so because the membrane is selectively permeable, it means that it will allow certain substances to pass through it, others might not be, and this selection may be done due to size and the charge and so forth of the molecules inside and outside of the animal or plant cell. So if you look here, this green border that you can see right around here, that would represent the cell membrane. And the cell membrane right here, sorry. So the cell membrane now is not only a regulator, it acts as a barrier so that things inside the cell remain inside the cell and things outside the cell remain outside the cell. So it's also a barrier, as well as we can say it is selectively permeable and therefore acts as a regulator. We can highlight that one, a regulator. Good. Now the cell wall is different. The cell wall is not living. So unlike the cell membrane, which is living, highlight that too. So the cell membrane is living. The cell wall, on the other hand, is non-living. Right? And the cell wall is composed of a sugar called cellulose. And the cellulose is important because it is a fiber, so it is strong, and therefore it provides strength and protection to the cell. Strength and protection to the cell. Unlike the cell membrane, the cell wall is fully permeable, which means that substances can move through it freely. So the cell wall is non-living, made up of cellulose, and it provides structural support, strength and protection. Good. So if we look at this diagram here now, we can see that the plant cell, that thick green layer on the outside of the plant cell, is called the cell wall. Right? Just like our wall functions at home, that's the same way the cell wall functions here. It is immovable. The cytoplasm now is a complex solution of which is clear and jelly-like in nature. It consists of about 70% water. Important to know, there's a lot of water in the cell cytoplasm. Most chemical or rather metabolic activities of the cell takes place in the cytoplasm, right? And as a result of that, you can have a lot of waste materials there, as well as a lot of food material. So the water in it dissolves and distribute the nutrients throughout the structure of the cell. So the cytoplasm is important for the metabolic reactions that are occurring within the cell. Good. And that would be like, for example, the yellow section of the cell that you see here, that would be the cytoplasm as labeled here, yellow section. So within the cytoplasm you have the organelles, or the other internal structures of the cell that are distributed throughout the cytoplasm. Alright, next structure we're talking about here is the nucleus. The nucleus really is important because it does what? Stores, let's put inherited slash genetic information. So inherited, or if you want to say genetic information, right, is stored in the nucleus. Now this information is very, very important. It controls all the processes that goes on inside the cell. So it is very, very important so that we can have the information here. Right, so they are tiny, you have some tiny thread-like bodies now within the nucleus called chromosomes. I like this one as well. Chromosomes are the structures. So it's like you have a library, and you stack up all the books with information inside there. So the books would be like the chromosomes, and the information within the book would be like the DNA. Good. So are the genetic information. So the nucleus is important like that because the nucleus is like a library, and it stores a whole lot of information. So this little, the central areas in these two cells would represent what a nucleus would generally look like. Good. Next one is the mitochondria. The mitochondria is found in all living cells. They are described as the powerhouse of the cells, and it is here that energy is released from the food, and that release of energy from the food with the combination of oxygen, we call that respiration. So this process of respiration occurs within the mitochondria. A real example of this could be, like, let's say for the power producing plant like JPS or any other area that generates electricity. So if we would say that Jamaica is a cell, then the mitochondria would be that company that generates electricity for Jamaica, if you understand what I'm saying. All right. So the power producing entity within any cell or every cell is the mitochondria. Now, I would love to ask you a question. If we have the mitochondria as the power producing entity in a cell, which cells in the body do you think would need to have a lot of mitochondria in them, and why? Good. If you're thinking, then your answer would most likely be the muscle cells. You could use a specific example and say the the um the heart muscle, or if you want to say the smooth skeletal muscles and so forth, and all the muscles that you can think of in the body, all of them would be important because the muscle cells are always moving and their role is to cause movement, and that requires a lot of energy. So the cells in your body that has a lot of mitochondria would be the cells in your body that do a lot of work, right? Like your heart muscle, a lot of mitochondria are going to be found in those muscle cells, and all the other muscle cells, the smooth skeletal muscle and so forth. The next organelle is the chloroplast. The chloroplast now is found in plant cell, and it is the chloroplast contain chlorophyll, and chlorophyll is a pigment that is green. Let me put green there so that it stands out for you. Right? So the chlorophyll is a green pigment, and that pigment captures sunlight energy, and that energy is needed for the manufacturing of food, which is, they make glucose and then they store it as starch, right? So that's why you find the starch granules within the plant cell as well, right? So the chlorophyll is important because it makes food. The next organelle we're looking at here is the vacuole. The vacuole is important because it does what we call, it stores what we call cell sap. So the vacuole is a membrane bounded organelle, just like the chloroplast and the mitochondria. They're all membrane bounded, and the nucleus is membrane bounded as well. The vacuole is important because it contains a lot. It's like a lake within the cell. So if you look down here, you see a little diagram right here, and you see the thing pointing to vacuole. Good. The vacuole is like a little lake. So in there you have a lot of salts, minerals, water, and so forth of the cell. A lot of the materials are stored in there. So the vacuole is like a little storage area as well. Waste material and so forth is transported there as well. Endoplasmic reticulum. This is a network of membranes and channels that run through the cytoplasm, and its main role is to provide a medium for transport of materials. So the endoplasmic reticulum operates like in our real life situation, like a road network. So if you have a road network that allows people to move from one place to the next, and importantly allows goods to be transported. So if you have a manufacturing company that makes breads, buns, bullers, cakes, all the food you can think of in one area of the country, and another area needs those materials, you have a road network that takes it to them. Just the same, it is in the cell. We call that road network the endoplasmic reticulum, right? And it provides a medium for transport of materials from one area of the cell to a next area of the cell. Good. It also helps in the production of proteins and lipids. And how that occurs is because within or on the endoplasmic reticulum, sometimes you have some little tiny structures now. These tiny structures are called ribosomes, like some dots. Right, so if you look on this picture right down here, you can see that you have some little dots on it, like some bumps. Right, those are ribosomes, and those little structures called ribosomes are used to manufacture proteins. So when you see endoplasmic reticulum with these little dots or bumps on it that make it look rough and rugged, we call it rough endoplasmic reticulum. And its role is to produce, it also produces, apart from transport and so forth, it produces proteins. The one over on this side that don't have the ribosomes on it, we call it the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and it aids in the production of lipids as well as transport. You know that already. Good. So basically, that's what some of the major organelles. There are others that we did not highlight. I will show you some diagrams now that have other organelles in present, but you can research the functions of those for enrichment purposes. So let us look at the generalized structure of an animal cell now, seen with an electron microscope. So this here is a diagram of an animal cell that we would see, that shows you basically what an animal cell would look like if we were looking at it using an electron microscope. I'll give you a clearer picture here. So we can identify a lot more organelles, right? Some of them we don't have to worry about them for now at the level that we're at, but we can identify some. So the plasma membrane, we can identify the membrane, right, that separates the outside from the inside. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum right here. Over this side we have the rough one, so you can see the dots that are on it. The nucleus is this entire structure right here. Good. And inside you have those threads of chromatin, same thing as chromosomes, right? But the nucleus here have some little openings or pores. They call them nuclear pores. Don't have to worry about that either. Good. Lysosomes are really like some little vessels, membrane-bounded vessels. They are used for transport as well. You can identify the mitochondria right here. There's one here, one here, one here, and here, and here. Good. So that's what we have. This is what we refer to for the when we talk about looking at the animal cell, the generalized animal cell under an electron microscope. Good. For plant cells, though, it's a bit different. Plant cells are generally they have this large central vacuole. Don't have to always be in the center. Can be to any side, right? If we're labeling, we can look at it. You can look at this one using to label, right? Large central vacuole, which always prominent. You know, this is the cell wall again is also prominent. That makes it different from the animal cell. So let us review. When we are reviewing now, first thing I want to just to catch you with is to be able to compare plant and animal cells as seen under electron microscope, so we can identify A as being the cell membrane. This one tends to catch a lot of students because it looks very similar. You have to look very carefully to realize that it is pointing at the cell membrane. B is pointing at the cell wall. C comparing, talking about the cytoplasm. D looking at the vacuole, small in the plant, in the animal, but large in the plant. Right, so when we look at we're comparing them, so D would be the vacuole, E is the nucleus, you can see that's pointing to both nucleus. F would be the chloroplast, because note it is no, it's absent in the animal cell. G H would be the mitochondria. The arrows are a bit big here, but it's clear that it is pointing at the mitochondria in both. J would be the smooth. J and I and J look similar because I think what the diagram wanted to show was one with smooth endoplasmic reticulum and one with the rough endoplasmic reticulum. Alright, some questions here. Which statement best describes a cell? A says cells are the building blocks of plants. Plants are not the only living things, so A would not be the answer. Cells are the building blocks of non-living things. B would not be the answer because remember that cells deal with living things, not non-living things. C said cells are building units of all living things, which would be correct. There are three main structures common to most cells, and these three main structures are nucleus, chloroplast, no. Nucleus, cytoplasm, and cell membrane would be correct, so the answer would be B. 3 says which characteristics is true about animal cells. Animal cells have a fixed shape? No. Animal cells can change their shape. That's true. Right? Animal cells have a rigid shape, rigid cell wall? No. Animal cells have very large vacuoles? No. So the answer is B. Animal cells can change their shape depending on what function they serve. Which characteristic is false about plants? Plant cells. Plant cells have a large central vacuole. That is true, so that couldn't be the answer. B. Plant cells have a fixed shape. That is true, so B could be the answer. Let us see if C and D have anything better. Plant cells can change their shape. That is not true because they have a rigid cell wall. Plant cells have a cell membrane. That is true. So which of the following characteristics is false about plant cells? Plant cells can change their shape. Would that be false? Yes, that would be false. Plant cells have a fixed shape. That would be true. So the correct answer would be C. Plant cells can change their shape. That is not true because we know that they have a rigid cell wall that prevents them from doing that. This question says which of the following does not contain a cell? Which of the following does not contain a cell? The answer would be sand. Sand is a non-living particle, silicon and so forth, and quartz. So that's non-living. So that's an easy question right there. So let's look at number 6. When fuel burns in the engine of a car, energy is released. Which process occurring in living organisms is most similar to this? It wouldn't be excretion because we know excretion is the removal of metabolic waste. It would be movement because we know that these moving from one location to the next. Nutrition is the consumption or production of food. Let's say the consumption of food. But respiration, which we said initially was the release of energy, right? Use of oxygen to release energy in the mitochondria. So respiration would be the answer. Alright, finally let's look at this last question. The diagrams show a cell from an onion and a cell from a liver. Which guideline does not point to the same structure on both diagrams? And that would not be A because A is saying cytoplasm in plant cell and in the liver cell. It wouldn't be B. B is saying nucleus in or nuclear membrane in the onion cell and nuclear membrane in the liver cell. It would not be C because the C is saying the nucleus in both cells. But let's look at D. For D it is saying the cell wall, and for the plant, and for the animal's liver cell it is saying the cell membrane. So the answer would be D, right? And D would be the one that is not pointing to both structures and the same structures in both cells. Alright, So what you can do for an assignment, what you can do is to draw and label an animal cell, right? So, and make sure that the drawings are done on a blank page, and your labelings must include all of these structures listed here: rough and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, vacuole, chloroplast, mitochondria, nucleus, cytoplasm, cell wall, and cell membrane. Right? Do that and submit it on a blank leaf so I can look at your drawing. This will help you to recall the different structures within the plant and animal cell. Thank you very much. That is it.